Stumps and Stories podcast with Nishant Pai Vaidya.
One of the great things about cricket is touring. You get to visit so many countries and then fans have a look at you. And in the process, you make memories. Teams make memories, players make memories. And today, I'm joined by someone who left a lasting impression on Indian fans. And even years down the line, when we say the word Zimbabwe, one of the first names that comes to a cricket fan's mind in India, it is Olonga. Henry Olonga was a fast bowler who bowled with pace, a fast bowler who bowled with a lot of fire, and invariably his performances, his good performances, came against India in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Other than that, of course, Henry was someone who left an impression even with his character. He was someone who could sing. He had this personality about himself. So I'm really excited to speak to him on this podcast today. He joins us from Adelaide in Australia, where he's now settled. Henry, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys, and it's my pleasure.
So, Henry, just jogging your memory back to all those times where in this country where cricket is loved so much, you are still remembered. All those memories are still cherished. And the first of them was in a test match in 1998, because I think it was very early in your test career and you took 5 wickets against a famed batting lineup. Now, who all were there in that batting lineup? Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, who got 100, Mohammad Azharuddin, all the big names, Saurabh Ganguly, and you get that fifer. So what are your memories of that test match?
I think I need to rewind a little bit and go back to the start of my career, which wasn't a great start. I'd made my test debut against Pakistan in 95. I'd been called for throwing. It had been a long time since anyone had been called for throwing. So you can imagine the somewhat premature birth of my career, in that there were all sorts of issues surrounding my having to fix my action, which led me, strangely enough, to India. So my very first trip to India was in 95 when I went to Madras, and there was the Chennai or Madras-based MRF Pace Foundation.
Yes.
There was a gentleman called Shaker. I can't remember his first name. He was helping run it.
Yeah.
And Joel Garner and Dennis Lilly were coming there periodically to help with the fast bowling challenge that India had. Because back in the day, India recognized they needed to produce fast bowlers. They had a lot of spin bowlers, maybe due to the nature of the wickets in India. I'm not sure, but there'd been a great tradition of spin bowling and maybe not so much one of fast bowling. Now, that's not to say you didn't have fast bowlers. You had Javigal Srinath. There was Venkatesh Prasad. There were others that were sort of on the way up, but they just weren't seriously quick, and there wasn't a big pool of them. So India had decided they were going to do something about this. So that was my first interaction with India, as of course, as an 18-year-old young boy with an issue with his action. It was a great privilege for me to travel there, and I was taken care of. And then in 96, I came to Adelaide in Australia, and that's when I worked with Lily again and some others, Rod Marsh, and a whole group of other people here. And then in 97, I went to South Africa, and I spent about 6 months at the academy there. So when India came in 98, a number of things had happened. First of all, I'd spent 3 years of remedial work on my technique. I had this issue, it needed fixing, and thankfully the Zimbabwe Cricket Board, the ICC, various people around the world, the South African Cricket Board, of course, Cricket Australia, and the Indian board felt that I guess my story would have been a sad end if I'd been the first black player to play for Zimbabwe, which I was, to then leave the game in disgrace. So in a sense, I'm eternally grateful for the people that still believed in me in spite of my terrible start. Having said that, 98, just prior to that India match, one of the selectors, his name was Andy Pycroft. He's actually now an international match referee. He travels around the world refereeing matches. But he back then was a selector in Zimbabwe. In fact, he was an ex-Zimbabwe player from the early 80s, I think. He was
He
a
played the
batsman, but he's a,
83 World Cup, played
yeah,
against
that's
India in
right.
the 83 World Cup. Yes.
Yeah. So, cutting a long story short, he sat me down and said, listen, Henry, we've given you many chances. You've played for 3 years now. I hadn't played a lot of cricket in that time, but I'd played enough matches for them to say, well, I played in a one day against South Africa in '95. I played in the Pakistan series. I played in '96 when England came. And in '97, I got injured. I needed a wrist operation because I fractured a bone in my hand. I needed a bone graft, which took many months to heal. So I missed out a bit of that season. But suffice to say, they'd seen enough of me and they were basically saying, listen, you have to go out there and get 5 wickets or we won't pick you again.
Ooh.
So in one sense, there was a lot hanging on my selection in that match. In addition, I'd played in a warm-up match maybe the week before that India test in Harare, and I'd actually strained a groin muscle. I'd actually I had a tear in my groin muscle. Um, and so it was touch and go whether I'd play anyway. But then Mr. Pycroft came and sat me down and said, listen, you need to go out there and get 5 wickets or we won't pick you again. So everything was on the line. And so, of course, the wonderful thing from our point of view, Zimbabwe's point of view, is the curator, the groundsman, produced a very fast, bouncy, and green wicket. He left a lot of grass on it. And now I have to scratch my head and remember what happened. But I think we bowled first, or did no India? I
Zimbabwe batted
suspect
first and scored 221. Then India
that's right.
batted and yeah.
That's right. So round about the end of day one, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of day one, we bowled maybe a few spells at them. I can't imagine maybe
Yes.
more than an hour or tea or something like that, because we were bowled out well within that first day. And um, I obviously am not looking at the score sheet in front of me, but if I'm not mistaken, I got Navjot Sidhu. Um, I think I also got Azruddin, Ganguly, um, the wicket keeper. What was the wicket keeper's name?
So wicketkeeper was Nayan Mongia.
I
So
think I might have got Nayan Mongear as well, and then I got one more. I could be getting mixed up with the second innings, but anyway, I got five
so the
wickets.
first innings on day one, India ended at 6 for 1. So you already had Sidhu. And
Yes,
the next day, then you got Nayan Mongia and
yep.
Mohammad Azharuddin, Saurav Ganguly, and Robin Singh.
Robin Singh was the last one. Yes, so I'm glad I remembered most of them.
Yes.
But in any case, I managed to get this neoprene thigh sleeve from a physiotherapy place, which held my groin together. Um, it certainly swelled up throughout my bowling spell. It was very uncomfortable, but that's a fast bowler's lot. You're never going to bowl 100% fit. There's always going to be some niggle or some old injury that you have to deal with, a sore back or something like that. And so I learned very early on in my career that sometimes you just have to what's called bite the bullet. I just had to bite the bullet and get through it. And so thankfully, my bowling spell was, I wouldn't say it was match winning, but it certainly put us within touching distance of India. India had a small lead, didn't they? Something
Yes.
like 30 to 50 runs or something. I can't remember, but it was something like that. Maybe 50-ish runs.
Yeah, just around 59 runs they had.
Yeah,
Uh,
something like that. And so we batted again. And I don't know what they chased in the last innings, but it was somewhere in the region of 250 or something like that.
yeah,
And
235 was the target.
yeah,
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
yeah.
And we managed to bowl them out, short of the total. Mr. Johnson, Neil Johnson, got Tendulkar in both innings. I think we got Dravid cheaply out in the second, so that helped our cause. And of course, we then won that match. It was our second Test victory after winning against Pakistan in '95, and it was momentous for me because it showed that I had the capacity to be someone who could turn a game by bowling fast.
And you mentioned that you were the first black cricketer to play for Zimbabwe, and then this whole journey of 3 years, doing remedial work on the action, a few injuries, and then you're given this sign that, look, you need to perform, otherwise you won't be picked again. For a young man, what was that weight like? Because on the one hand, you are also someone who's looked up to by a large community in your country. So was that weighing on you in those months?
Yes and no. And the reason I say no is because back in the day when I started, um, I don't even believe we televised the match. So cricket was a very niche sport. It was mainly white people who played the game at club level, provincial level, and of course national level. So when I made my debut, I was obviously breaking the ceiling. And in a sense, because cricket was such a minority sport, it didn't have this journalistic scrutiny that some of our other sports would have had. So even though I got called for throwing, it's not like it was emblazoned on every newspaper in the country. And we didn't have many newspapers, incidentally. There was like one government gazette newspaper called the Herald. There was another one in Bulawayo, where I came from, in Matabeleland, called the Chronicle. And that was about it. So it wasn't as if I had this onslaught of pressure being put on me by the media, like it would be in England or indeed in India. So, but I did understand the weight and the gravity of what it meant to become the first black player, even though I think it really only dawned on me many, many years after I made my debut as to the true significance of it. I knew I was the first black player. I knew they'd made a song and dance about it. They had written about it in various outlets. I'm not suggesting they hadn't. I'd been interviewed by a few journalists from England. One of them was called Jeffrey Dean. There was another one called Barney Spender. There was another man called John Ward, who was the Wisden cricketer correspondent. This is before Cricinfo, and then I think Wisden was bought by Cricinfo, or the other way around, and then ESPN Cricinfo bought it, and it is what we know now as ESPN Cricinfo. But back in the day, they just had this one correspondent called John Ward, and so he would write about the match, etc. So there wasn't this overt scrutiny that I felt, which is, now with social media, if you just sneeze in a cricket match, the whole world knows about it, and if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, like run out a batsman, while he's going to do some gardening on the wicket, the whole world knows about it and argues about it, or whatever it is, a man cad, or what, you know what I mean? It's like everyone knows everything instantaneously almost, whereas back in the day, it wasn't that bad. But obviously in the years to come later on, when other black players started to come through and emerge, like Everton Matambanadzio and Pomi Mbangwa and Trevor Madondo, then clearly having been the first black player to play, kind of started to sink in a little more.
You said the match wasn't televised, but what was televised was a game a few weeks after that, which was in Sharjah, which was a cricketing epicenter at the time in one-day cricket. And you had a dazzling night, I must say, because you took 4 wickets against India in front of a crowd that had not just assembled there in the stadium, but millions watching back in India. And you created an impression. That 4-wicket haul and getting Sachin Tendulkar out. What was that like? What was that night for you, having done well in the test match and then in one-day cricket making that impact?
In one-day cricket, they didn't really consider me as a one-day cricket player because I was very expensive. I think throughout my career, I struggled with economy rate. Nowadays, if you look at my economy rate, it was bad, but it's not as bad as some players from this day and age because people are very hungry now. People are scoring at 5-6 runs and over now quite consistently. Whereas back in my day, when I first started, you'd be happy to go to score about 200 off your first 40 overs and then, try and get to 250. You'd be happy with that. You'd think we can defend that. So scores of 300 weren't common. Some good teams got them, but they weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. Boundaries were bigger. Nowadays, they brought the boundaries in for safety for players, etc. But back in the day, it was very different. So they didn't really consider me economical enough to be picked consistently in one day games. I think by that stage, I'd played against South Africa in '95 on debut. And I don't think I played another one day match. I could be mistaken, but I don't think I played another one day match until Sharjah. Um, and so what happened there was we were playing in this Tri Nations. So there was India, there was ourselves, and maybe Sri Lanka. Is that
Yes,
right?
Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was the third team.
Um,
Yes.
you have to forgive me. This is more than 20 years ago, you know. So
No,
so
that's
I've got
fine.
I have
It's
to
perfect.
jog my memory. Um, but and of course, what happened was Sri Lanka were ejected because I think we beat them enough times and we beat India enough times, or whatever happened, we got through. And uh, we managed to make the final. And of course, there was a dead rubber to be played. There was one more match, and um, they picked me because they thought, well, it doesn't matter if we lose or whatever happens. There's no pressure. We can risk trying to play Henry, even though he's a bit erratic. So I wasn't even on the supposed to be on the in the initial 14 man squad, whatever it was. Because if you watch that match, you will notice that I don't even have a name on the back of my shirt. Everyone else had their name, but I didn't. So I was a last minute addition. And so, because of the test match, as you said, the test match performance. And so, um, yeah, I had a bit of a blinder, as you said. So everything went right. I got Ganguly in the first over I bowled, I think. I think when I watched the footage back, I think it pitched outside leg stump. But hey, it was back in the day before, these challenges and all those things you can do nowadays. The DRS system, so that didn't exist back then. But I will admit that's one wicket in my career where I look at it. I got lucky there. I think it was Steve Dunn was the umpire, the left-handed New Zealander. Anyway, he gave Ganguly out, and then I got Dravid in the next over, I think, and then before I talk about Sachin's dismissal, I actually uh, the night before that match, in our team talks, in our team talk prior to the match, the management of the team, as in the coach and the captain, etc., had all decided they'd made this unilateral decision that all the bowlers were getting too many wickets, bowling no balls. So they decided they were going to punish the bowlers by making you forfeit your match fee if you got a wicket off a no ball. I know. So it's very weird, isn't it? Because nothing happened to the batsmen if they got a stupid run out or gave a soft dismissal. There was nothing for the batsmen. It was just the bowlers. So um, so I ran in. So I had two wickets in the bag, and then I ran in, and obviously top wicket, Ganguly, Dravid, top batsman. Um, and I bowled a beautiful delivery to Sachin. He'd played a few shots. I think he got a few away. But then I bowled a good ball. It was just outside off stump, and it hit the seam, and it might have moved away just a smidgen. And then I got an outside edge. He played a defensive stroke. He wasn't trying to drive it. It was just at least in my memory anyway. I don't think it was an aggressive shot. And then just before the ball reached Andy Flower, our wicketkeeper, I heard Steve Dunn crying out, "No ball." So you can imagine my disappointment at getting Sachin out, and then now it was illegitimate. And then I thought to myself, hold on, I'm not going to get my match fee. So it was a double whammy. And then the very next ball after that, I ran in really fast and I just bowled him a bouncer, which I think caught him a little bit by surprise. And he was caught at Silly Point by Grant Flower, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's right.
So that was three of the top order. Um, I also got a run out. I don't know if I got a fourth wicket. I think I only got
You got
three.
Jadeja. You got Ajay Jadeja as well. So you
Oh,
got the
okay.
top
Thank
four.
you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you go. That's a surprise to me. But anyway, so I got four. And then I got a run out. I can't remember who that was. I think it might
Nain
have been
Mongia.
Singh.
That was
Oh, it was
Nain
Mongia.
Mongia.
Okay. And then, of course, I was man of the match. It was wonderful. And Alistair Campbell was very bullish about my chances in the final. And he said, "We're going to pick Henry. Doesn't matter." He said, "I don't care. We're picking Henry." So
You got
he
your
sort
match
of said,
fee.
I did. I got my match fee and I got man of the match as well. So there was a little extra. But back in the day, we just split our man of the match fees anyway with the rest of the team. I think the man of the match got a portion of it, and the rest was put into the big pot, which was then split up. So then, of course, the final. So Sachin Tendulkar, I believe, was very, very unhappy with me. Uh, uh, Maybe because of the manner in which he was dismissed. Um, I mean, I don't know, but he got very angry. He decided I was public enemy number one, and because I'd already done it in the test match, and now I'd done it in a one day game. I suppose, yeah, he wanted to put me in my place, and so he did. He did it in spectacular fashion in the final, which was a couple of days later or whenever, and he was fantastic. So we obviously didn't get enough runs. 180 something. Am I right? Uh,
Yeah, 190 something, and then yes,
yeah,
it was chased
yeah.
down.
Yeah, so it wasn't a great score. If we'd managed to put, I don't know, 250 plus on the board, there would have been just a little bit more pressure. Um, three and a bit runs and over is not a really challenging total. But had it been 4 runs or 5 runs and over, I think um, we would have had more runs to play with, and we possibly could have done a better job of defending the total. But anyway, maybe if we'd scored 300, they would still have chased it down because Mr. Tendulkar was very, very flawless on that day. I don't think he gave a chance. He smashed a few sixes. Of course, I wasn't the only one who came in for a bit of stick. Grant Flower, Paul Strang, if I'm not mistaken, I think he played as well. I think we all got a bit of tap, but he was fantastic. He scored a wonderful 100 and he won it for his country, which was the epitome of sportsmanship. It's wonderful to see. In hindsight, when you sort of look back on your career and you see the dominance of someone like Tendulkar, it was quite a privilege to be there and to see him do what he did and to be at his best. Uh, I follow other sports, of course. So, you see Alcaraz against Djokovic, and Djokovic is feeling the pain now, but maybe in 20 years' time, he'll look back and go, wow, that was an extraordinary moment. I lost. He wasn't smashed, but he lost. But um, it was amazing that he was in the thick of a battle between one country and another, one sportsman and another. And that's the unique thing about cricket is it's a team sport, and yet you can still have individual battles of people fighting against each other. And he certainly won on that occasion. So I'd sort of forgotten about it because, you move on in life. And then someone found a copy and uploaded it onto YouTube, and it's been viewed a few million times. And now every Indian I interact with online is like, Tendulkar, Tendulkar. But that, of course, wasn't the end of the story because then only a few months later, we had the World Cup in England, and I was able to exact my revenge again.
You were a part of the 96 World Cup squad as well, but you didn't play a game. Coming into 99 World Cup with a young bowler being in form, there was a different perception about you. What was the mood in the camp for Zimbabwe and for you personally heading into England?
We'd just gone to Pakistan, and we'd actually won the Test series
Yes.
there. We only played one Test match. The second one I think was drawn or abandoned due to fog. The third one, I don't think we bowled a ball. So in a three Test match series, Zimbabwe won the first one, and we won the series. I was man of the series for Zimbabwe. Yusuf Yohana, or Mohammed Yusuf, I think he's called now. He was the Pakistan player of the series. So I'd had a good 3 months. I'd played in the match in which we beat India in Harare, Sharjah, Pakistan. So I was brimming with confidence. The team was good. The team was brimming with confidence as well. We had a good middle order. We had just acquired Murray Goodwin and Neil Johnson, I beg your pardon. So Neil Johnson had come from South Africa. Murray Goodwin, he was overseas. I think he was playing cricket here in Australia for Western Australia.
Perth, I think. Yeah.
And he'd come over to Zimbabwe. So we had a strong middle order, which we'd struggled with for a long time. David Houghton had retired, and he'd become our player coach for a season or two, and then he became the full-time coach. And so he'd left a hole around about the middle order. And so those two coming in made us have a very strong batting lineup. So Grant Flower, Andy Flower, oftentimes in the early part of my career, opened the batting. We, throw in Alistair Campbell in there. And then Neil Johnson, Murray Goodwin. I've got to scratch my head and think of all the other players. But the top five, top six were very, very competitive. And we were then capable of doing pretty well. We had the confidence, having beaten India and beaten Pakistan, that we could play top sides, and on our day, we could cause an upset or two. So confidence was high. We went into that World Cup needing to beat at least 3 teams, I think it was, in our pool. And we targeted a few teams. So we said, Kenya, we should win. And we did. It was our first match, I think, in Chelmsford. No, not Chelmsford. Down in Taunton, I think. We played Kenya in Taunton. Beat them convincingly, had a good net run rate because we beat them convincingly, and we scored, a nice first innings total. Neil Johnson scored, if I'm not mistaken, something like a good 70, and he bowled well as well. So, long story short, this was almost the Neil Johnson show for a number of matches because he just, in a lot of those matches, he was our talisman. I can't remember our next match, but in any case, it might have been India at Grace Road in Leicester. And the story there, of course, the story of the day was Sachin's dad had passed away. So he went home to pay his respects. An India team without Sachin Tendulkar is a considerably weaker team. No disrespect to the players that were left, but he was really a key player for India. So without him, they were going to struggle. And then, as you mentioned earlier, India were very naughty. They had a slow over rate, and they got docked 3 overs. So chasing it feels like 250 to me. Yeah, 250. Yes. So chasing 250 off 47 overs. My first bowling spell wasn't great. I bowled maybe 3 overs, and I went for something like 20 runs. And I got so much abuse by the Indian fans who thought we've got this in the bag, right? And India were kind of doing it slow and steady, and they were doing it at a canter. Again, I can't remember too much of the highlights of who got runs or whatever, but at the end of the innings, India had 7 wickets in hand, and they required only 8 more runs. Something like that, when Alistair Campbell approached me and gave me the ball.
They had 3 wickets in hand, actually.
Yeah, I said 7 wickets down. What did I say?
He said 7 wickets in hand, actually. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. 7 wickets down is what I meant. Yes, 7 wickets down, 3 wickets in hand. And Alistair Campbell came up to me and he said, "This is what you're picked for, Henry. Moments like this is why we pick you." So another colleague of mine, another teammate, Stuart Carlisle, he was fielding, I believe, maybe at mid-on or mid-off. Said something similar, and he said, "You can go and make history," something like that. So one of the things I had been doing was I think we played with either Dukes or Reader balls in England. I can't remember what we played with in that World Cup, but I've got a feeling it was the Duke ball, either Duke or Reader, and the ball it had a big seam, a very pronounced seam, and it swung a lot. In fact, having said that, the extras column for Zimbabwe were, you know, the highest scorer for the, for the opposition. And we were very poor in controlling the ball. But the thing about that ball is it did scuff up on one side well if you treated it right, and it could reverse swing. And so I'd been practicing a lot of reverse swing bowling for the death, for moments like that. Because back in the day, as I mentioned earlier, teams were happy to go hard in the first 15, and then remember the field would spread. We didn't have power plays and all that. You could only have two people out the ring in the first 15, and then you could spread the field. And then the last 10 overs, most teams at what was called the death would just swing out if they had wickets in hand. So I knew that they'd be coming hard in every match we played in the last 10, and I was one of the death bowlers. So I'd practiced my death bowling quite a lot. And so anyway, long story short, I blame Robin Singh for India losing that match because I came round the wicket and I bowled, I think, a half volley. It wasn't a great ball. There was no menace in it. All he had to do was keep it on the ground and hit it through to the sweeper to get one, and they would have, they needed 7 runs with 3 wickets in hand. Instead, he chipped it to Alistair Campbell, who was at a sort of short cover position. I can't remember. Who caught the ball. That was our first wicket. Then Javigal Srinath was on strike. I think they might have scampered a single or so because Kumble was in at the same time. But I got to bowl at Javigal Srinath, and I bowled him a peach of a Yorker. It was a very good Yorker. It beat him for pace. It swung in. It dipped late. It did all the right things. As they say, that was the moment I'd been training for. And then Venkatesh Prasad comes in. I think they needed 4 runs maybe by this stage. They, 1 boundary away. And I'm sure India thought we've got this in the bag, except I managed to bowl a straight ball. It was on a length. It wasn't a perfect Yorker. I was aiming for a Yorker, but I missed my length by about 2 meters. But it was quick enough and it was straight enough. And initially I wanted to scamper to get the ball because I thought they might try and run a quick single. But then within a split second of thinking that and half running to the ball, I thought that actually looks like a bad, like not such a bad shout. So I turned around and appealed. And again, I think the umpire was Steve Dunn. No, it was Peter Willey. It was Mr. Willey, I think. He gave Prasad out. And so, of course, there was pandemonium because we'd clutched defeat from the jaws of victory. India had done that. And we'd managed to steal that victory because I don't think we deserved to win, no doubt. I think India should have done it at a canter. But so on sort of 3 occasions, I'd proved myself as somewhat of an asset to the team in that I could come and bowl these quick spells and be quite destructive, even though I was still expensive and, on a bad day would be smashed around the park. But we then went on. We lost to Sri Lanka. I hope I'm not mixing up the Super 6 here. But anyway, we lost to England.
And then beat South Africa.
Then we beat South Africa. We met South Africa at Chelmsford in Essex. And again, that was a Neil Johnson show. He took 3 wickets, maybe 4. He got Gary Kirsten off the first ball. He then got Cullis, and he got Hansi Cronje. And they were very, very important members of the team. Heath Streak, Adam Huckle got a run out of Herschel Gibbs, I think. Boucher had been sent in as the pinch hitter. There was a mix-up. So Herschel Gibbs was out. And then Heath Streak got Boucher, and I think he also got Jonty Rhodes. On that day, everything went to hand and everything was caught. I don't remember us dropping a catch. Andy Whittle took an amazing catch, I think, to get rid of Steve Elworthy. I got Sean Pollock. I was fielding at long on, and he hit a flat ball, which would have gone for 6 because the boundary is quite short at Chelmsford. But I caught it. It was stinging. It hurt. But we got them all the way down to Alan Donald, who I then bowled a rather quick ball, which he popped up and was caught by Heath Streak. But, it was fortunate that we kept getting the other wicket out, the other side of the batting out, because Lance Klusener was doing his usual rampage, where he would just steal games from teams by just smashing the ball. And he was starting. And so fortunately, we managed to get them out for, I don't know, 170-ish. It feels like something like that. And we then qualified for the Super Six stage. And I remember standing on the balcony at the Chelmsford on the pavilion, and it was just a sea of red Zimbabwe shirts and the Zimbabwe flag flying, and all the Zimbabwean supporters there, however many they were, just screaming and shouting Super Six, Super Six, because we qualified on that day. So it was a tremendous opportunity for Zimbabwe, but we didn't really make an impression in the Super Six stage. I think we played Pakistan, got beaten by them. We played New Zealand. It was a rained-off game. We lost to Australia at Lords. I got the wicket of Ricky Ponting, which was the only highlight for me, but Neil Johnson had a brilliant game. He scored a brilliant 100. But Australia, they scored 300 runs. It was too much for us. We failed to get those runs. But we acquitted ourselves well. We almost could have got through to the semi-finals, I beg yours, because we were level on points with New Zealand going into a final match against Pakistan. But there's a bit of a story as to how we didn't qualify, and I won't get into that just yet. People should buy my book to find out what happened. But we made a stupid decision and ended up getting bowled out way before we should have been bowled out, and ended up being ejected from the World Cup. It was very deflating and very, very sad.
But looking at that performance, it was definitely memorable for Zimbabwe cricket, beating India, beating South Africa. Out of those two victories, which one you think was special for Zimbabwe cricket lovers? Because after all, South Africa are the neighbors, right? And historically, that would have meant something. But India were this powerhouse where you perform against them and you make an impression in front of millions.
I think it's a hard one because to choose either. But I think we'd already beaten India in that test match and in one or two one-days, but we'd never beaten South Africa. And honestly, I don't think we thought we had it in us to beat them, because they had a brilliant team that was full of superstars. They were very consistent. Generally, they had a good all-rounder group in their side. So remember, Hansi, he batted and bowled. Klusener, he batted and bowled. Pollock, he batted and bowled. Elworthy, he batted and bowled. And of course, Boucher was a wicketkeeper batsman who could act as a pinch hitter. And that's before I've talked about the specialists. And then they had Gary Kirsten. They had, did I mention Jacques Kallis in the all-rounders? I think I missed him out. So they had a deep batting lineup and they had a deep bowling lineup. Almost made it through to the finals, of course. So in fact, I think that they were probably considered one of the teams that were favorites to win the World Cup because they'd played such dominant cricket for a long time. Again, it was early on in their return from isolation, but they were starting to also get this reputation for being chokers, which may be fair or unfair, I don't know. But one of the things we talked about in the team meeting was if we put enough pressure on them, even though they've got amazing personnel in their team, they can start to crack. And that's precisely what happened. So I think I'll choose South Africa because everyone in the team did their job. I can't say that was the case in the India match. But in the South Africa game, in fact, throughout my whole career, I think that's the one match that I would say the whole team contributed. And you can't pin it on one person and say, of course, I think Neil Johnson was the man of the match because he scored 75 and he took those wickets as well. So he was a standout. But I think as I said, we took every catch, everyone bowled just, nice and tight. Um, and our fielding was outstanding. So that match. But anytime you played India, you knew at the back of your mind, although I'm playing in front of 20,000 Indian people in the stadium, there are a billion people back home who are watching it and all over the world. So there was always that understanding that if you beat India, it would resonate. Whereas, when we beat South Africa, I don't think there was a collective shock, even though it was a giant slaying performance. I don't think that it had the same resonance. But yes, it's hard to pick either. And of course, when we beat India, there was no Tendulkar in it, so it somewhat takes something a little bit away from that defeat of India. But yeah, that South African victory, I think, was in test matches. For me, it was the Pakistan series in '98 in Pakistan. That's my favorite test match. And for my one days, I think that was my favorite team victory. Of course, I played against England in 2000 in Cape Town and got 6 wickets for 19
Yes.
to get the best bowling figures by a Zimbabwean. I don't know if those are still the best. They may have been surpassed by now. It's been 20 years, but or maybe more, 22 years, 23 years. But yeah, apart from that performance, I think my favorite team performance was the South African match of the World Cup.
And how was that performance in the World Cup viewed back home in the cricketing circles and generally among the fans?
Well, it put us in the conversation. I think it was then that I'm pretty sure round about then we started getting dedicated coverage on TV. Round about that period of time, 98, maybe perhaps that first India match was televised. I think I honestly don't know when it first started, but round about then we started to have live broadcasting. I think prior to that, it was just cameras were there, but it wasn't sent to the national network. Maybe it was in South Africa because there was a satellite TV called DSTV, and SuperSport used to cover it. But and once we started being on TV, then people started to understand there was this team. It was doing well in the world. Let's start to support them. So a lot of cricketers became more famous. That that victory against South Africa gave us hope that we could go far into the World Cup, which obviously didn't end up happening. But people started to want to support us and actually started to follow the sport. So it was a pivotal moment in Zimbabwe cricket's history because it showed that we could hang with the big boys and beat enough of them to make an impression. And it was the rebirth of our cricket team because we'd played quite a lot of cricket over the years. We'd played in the early 80s. We'd made our test debut as a nation in '92, I believe. We
Yes,
played
correct.
India. We played Sri Lanka. I think New Zealand came as well and played a one-off test at BAC, which I watched. And so we'd played a number of years. We'd played, but nothing suggested that we could be a team that could consistently beat some of the top teams in the world. And so that enabled players to become more famous. It also enabled sponsors to want to come and get involved in the game. So money started to come into the sport. We got sponsored vehicles. We started to do adverts on TV. Heath Streak and I did an advert for a pizza company. Of course, in India, it was when we traveled to India, they were billboards everywhere with cricket players on them. Sachin. There was all sorts of adverts on TV. Sachin's advert where he says nothing official about it, and he's drinking a Pepsi. There was all of that. So there was lots going on after our performances in the World Cup that put us cricketers on the map, and it made cricket a desirable sport. By this stage we had Pommy Bangwa in the squad and in the
Yes.
team. He was playing. I was playing a little later on, Trevor Madondo. So cricket was starting to become a more integrated team. It wasn't just a white sport anymore. It was now a team that had representation for all people. And that was really down to our performances in the World Cup. We also had some broadcasters. There was a guy called Michael. Was it Michael? No, it wasn't Michael. There was a guy called Parkinson. We used to call him Parky. And there was another guy called Pozzo, Mark Pozzo. And they had this radio show, and they used to have the drive time. And they started to talk about the cricket team in a positive light. And so that was probably 99, 2000, 2001 was the apex of Zimbabwe cricket's consistency, giant slaying performances, the ability to beat good teams. And soon after the World Cup, in fact, I think the next year we went on a tour of England. There were all sorts of issues that kicked off there. And then it wasn't long before we lost Neil Johnson and Murray Goodwin. And suddenly Zimbabwe cricket went backwards. We struggled to compete. Then before long, there was fights over money and infighting and power struggles for better pay between the players and the board, and then captaincy struggles. And Zimbabwe cricket then went into a state of decline, which started in maybe 2002, 2003, and then lasted for a number of years before Zimbabwe suspended themselves from Test cricket. I'm obviously jumping way ahead in the story here, but and then fielded an all-black side with mainly young players when we weren't able to compete. So that sordid affair all started way after we'd gone to the World Cup and then lost good players, and then the infighting began. But my most favorite and treasured memories of playing for Zimbabwe cricket were when we were united from 98 through to the early 2000s.
And in 2000, you came over to India. And Henry, I must share this with you. I was up in Kanpur a few years ago. And one of the people there said, years ago, the Zimbabwean team had come and they had this fast bowler who had done well against India in the World Cup. And people just wanted to see him. And even this was years after you were in Kanpur, that people still remembered you. And it was really amazing that people had that memory about you. So how was that tour to India in 2000? Of course, you had been here with the MRF Pace Foundation. Then you were here with the World Cup. But when you came around in 2000, you were a known name in the Indian cricketing circles. So what was that tour like? What was the kind of warmth you got from the fans? Because the evidence for me was years later, you were still remembered.
Man, I'm trying to remember that tour. Was that the tour in which we had Carl Rackerman as our coach?
This was the tour when it was the last time the ODIs were played with whites and the red ball. And you finished a game at Jodhpur playing, and you hit the winning runs in a high-scoring game.
Right.
Yes,
I remember that match. That's when Zahir Khan smashed me for 4 sixes, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay, I remember that one. So that was a tough tour for me for a number of reasons. I think once again, I'd had one of those talks from the selector, Mr. Pycroft, where it basically was like, hey, you better get some wickets or we won't pick you again. So I was always playing under this cloud. So other players, they would play 10 matches in a row and get, 10 runs per innings. And they just still get picked. No questions asked, right? But I always seem to have this consistent pressure on me that if I didn't go out there and do amazingly well, they wouldn't pick me again. I think they thought that was the best way to motivate me. And I don't think it was. But did we play some tests or was it just one day?
Yes,
I can't remember.
There were two test matches in which Andy Flower just refused to get out and swept and reverse swept everything.
Right. So interestingly enough, the test match in Delhi was the test match in which Andy and I scored, if I'm not mistaken, if this is that tour, Andy and I scored the highest at the time, the highest last wicket partnership in Zimbabwe for Zimbabwe in our first innings. Am I right? Have you got it up there?
It was
Um,
it Delhi?
yeah, it was Delhi. We declared we did what England did. We declared our first innings, um, batting first.
Yes, you
India
had a
batted.
97 run
That's right.
partnership. Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So in India, if I'm not mistaken, did we bat first? Who batted
Yes,
first?
yes, yes. Zimbabwe batted
We
first.
batted first, made 400 and something, and Andy and I were. Did we even get to 400? Maybe
Yes,
something in that.
422 for nine.
Yes. So Andy, I was very comfortable. Uh, as in, if they were going to get me out, they'd have to get me out. I was happy to hold the one end, and Andy Flower was doing his Andy Flower thing on the other end, and he kept talking me through it. And even Sachin was bowling. Sachin was bowling his leggies and his googlies, and it was turning and bouncing. Even on day one, it was it was turning and bouncing. And Sachin was actually quite a competent bowler. But I was able to pick him because Andy said, listen, watch the seam very carefully. When you see the seam very clearly, that's the leg spinner. When you see the seam is all scrambled, that's the googly. so, so I was able to pick it. And I lasted, I don't know how long that we batted for, but it was certainly, it felt like an hour or so. And we were so frustrating the Indians. And then we inexplicably declared. Now, let me explain that. I think the thinking was we wanted to play a very aggressive brand of cricket. We had Carl Rackerman as our coach, and he wanted us to play a brand of cricket that was very um, decisive. So we declared our first innings very similar to what England just did in the very first Test match of the Ashes. They wanted to play this aggressive brand of cricket. Now, I personally think you should never declare your first innings. Second innings, sure, because then the game has taken shape. First innings, try and get as much as you can. Anyway, Andy Flower, maybe he would have scored a double century. Who knows? I don't know. But we weren't afforded that opportunity. So anyway, long story short, after the first innings declaration, India also declared their first innings, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's right.
So they had a lead of some sort, but then they bowled us out a lot cheaper than we wanted, and then chased the runs down. So in the end, we had very little to show for that Test match. And then we went to Nagpur. Am I right? And
Yes.
all I can say about that match, two things. I think Sachin scored a double century, and I think Andy Flower also scored a double century, and I think Alistair Campbell scored his first century in Test match cricket as well. He hadn't. Can you believe he'd been playing for like 8 seasons and he hadn't scored a century? That was his first century. And in addition, everyone else in the squads, both squads, India and Zimbabwe, scored runs except for me. I, I got bowled out. I got bowled out for a duck by Javagal Srinath, I think. So it was a terrible affair for me. As far as bowling went, I don't even think I picked up a wicket. I struggled. I really did. But we were warned that Indian wickets are very unforgiving for fast bowlers, so we kind of knew that would be the case. The spinners would have to do it, and India won that series on the because they won the first test and the second test was drawn. And then the one days. So not only did we mention that match in which Zahir Khan hit me for 4 sixes, but Trevor Madondo, one of our fielders, caught the ball and then walked over the boundary. So I think it might have been the second shot that Zahir hit. So he could have hit 2 sixes and then been out. But then he just kept swinging. It was the last wicket, the last over of the 50. And then I believe Grant Flower scored a brilliant I think he's 100 batting for Zimbabwe and gave us a chance. And then I went out and faced Ajit Agarkar, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. He was running in. I really expected a Yorker because we needed whatever 1 or 2 runs to win, and he was very good at bowling Yorkers. Ajit Agarkar. He bowled at 140 k's an hour, and he was very good with his reverse swing. But he bowled a length ball, and I saw it and I hit it, and we ran 2 or 1 or whatever that we needed, and I think I was batting with Brian Strang, and we ended up winning that match. So that was memorable. I think something else that was memorable is, if I'm not mistaken, um, back in that series was when Douglas Marillier was, if I'm not, it could have been a later series, but I think it was
It
that
was the
series
next
when
series.
it was the next series when Douglas Marillier started doing the scoop, and it was quite extraordinary, really, to see him playing that shot and getting success with it. So, yeah, the India tours were always interesting and fun, and thoroughly enjoyed them. But they were tough cricket for us, and I think after I didn't do so well in India, I came home, and I think the next season they had demoted me from an A grade player to a C grade player. They were particularly displeased with how badly I'd done in England, in India, I beg your pardon. And so I got demoted. And that was the start of the slide for me as a player. Again, like I said, every match after that was my last match if I didn't, do amazingly well. And yeah, long story short, it was the downward slide. And then eventually, of course, a few months later, or years later, I did the black armband protest, which saw the end of my career.
But there is a very vague memory that I have of you doing commentary. Did that happen somewhere on an India tour or somewhere else?
Yeah. So that would have been, I'm pretty sure that would have been the Doug Marillier one. That series, not the first one. I played on the first one. The second one, I was invited by, I think it was called World Sport Nimbus. They were sort of the production company. I did some commentary there with Chris Cowdrey and obviously a lot of the Indian legends in the game, Sunil Gavaskar, Ravi Shastri, Harsha Bogle, all those guys. Wonderful, wonderful professionals. And it seemed at that point that maybe commentary was something I might take up later on in my life. But, things went in a different direction after that. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I did. I'll tell you a fun fact about that tour. And I mentioned this in my audiobook. It was interesting how um, I would call it the green-eyed monster started to appear in the team. You remember I mentioned that the team was united around about 99, 2000, and then they started to form cliques, and people started to argue about money and all sorts of other issues. Well, interestingly enough, on that tour as a commentator, I was actually flying business class everywhere because as a commentator, I was being taken care of by the broadcast company. And it didn't take long before someone announced that this wasn't okay. Why is Henry traveling in business class and the rest of us are traveling in cattle class? And so I was demoted again. So it was interesting and I write this honestly in my book that, that would never have happened to any other player. I was talking certainly white player. No white player would have accepted that, but they thought they could get away with it with me. So, and they did. So I started traveling cattle class with them. Thankfully, I still stayed in good hotels. They gave me my own hotel room, and they stayed out of that. But yeah, Zimbabwe cricket became very petty towards the end of my career. People started to look out for themselves, became very selfish. Um, and there are a number of things I mentioned in my audiobook about that. I won't go into too much detail, but um, a number of, we started asking for more money, which I think was a legitimate gripe. We weren't paid as well as we should have been, but with more money coming into the game and better pay, yeah, it became a less harmonious team.
You mentioned your audiobook a few times and your book. So, for our listeners, can you tell us how they can get to your audiobook and grab a copy as well? And also, in general, what are you up to in Australia these days? Because I know you've been singing as well. I've seen a couple of videos, your pictures on Instagram. So, just about these three things, so our listeners can also catch a glimpse of it.
Okay, so the first thing is my printed book is out of print. Um, there's the odd person who chucks it up on eBay. So you might be able to get a copy from eBay, but we don't print it anymore, at least not that I know of. So my publisher wants to print them in England and ship them to Australia, but it's too expensive. So I just don't have any copies. So that's the printed version. You got to have to buy secondhand. As far as the audiobook goes, it took me 2 years to do, maybe even 3, I can't remember, maybe 500 hours of scouring my memories and the internet and trying to line everything up chronologically. There are lots of mistakes here and there, I'm sure, because I can't remember everything perfectly. But I think the general tapestry of my story is in the audiobook. So just to be clear, it's in my own voice. I narrated it. It's not someone else reading it. It took me maybe 500 hours. I recorded it, I edited it, I mastered it, I did everything. Here in my little studio, this place I'm sitting in. It's just a little room in my home with a few microphones and a few things. Now that's available. That will be available on 45 audiobook platforms. So if any of the listeners have a normal audiobook app on their phone or on their computer, you should be able to get my book. So audible.com, it's not out yet there. It should be out by at least at most, I should say, the middle of August. It's on audiobook.com. It's on Google Play. It's on Barnes and Noble. It'll be on 40 audiobook platforms. So the easiest thing to do is to open your app on your computer or your phone or tablet, whatever, and just search for my name. The title of the book is Blood, Sweat and Treason, My Story, Expanded Version, Henry Olonga, something like that. Type my name in or type the title and it should come up. So, of course, I'd appreciate support from people. I'm a former cricketer who's struggling along in life. I'm not blessed like some of the Indian players who played for 2 seasons and could retire. So I'm constantly working, constantly performing and singing and doing other things. So I would appreciate support with the audiobook. The other thing is if you go to my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Threads, Instagram, I'll be posting links there. Now, some of those links don't work in all countries. As I said, if that's the case, just do a search for my book in your favorite app. As far as music goes, I was on The Voice, which is a talent show here in Australia, in 2019, I think. So I was still quite young then. I was, 43, I think. I'm now 47. So it was a good experience. I got through to the 3rd round and then I got sent home. My coach, Kelly Rowland, chose a rap artist over me, which is fair enough. That's the music she wanted. And ever since then, I've just continued to perform and sing and record. And so the next thing that'll happen after the book is launched is I will start releasing some of my music as well. So, and that'll be mainly on my YouTube channel. So I've got a YouTube channel. I think again, I've got this. If you go to any of my social media, I've got a thing called Linktree. If you click on that, it's got all my links. It'll tell you where to find me on whichever website you're looking for. So YouTube is the place where I'll start to upload my music, starting maybe the middle of next month, maybe even sooner. and I want to produce a lot of music. So I appreciate any people subscribing to my channel. I've got about 1,000 people at the moment. It would be nice to have a few more. So, um, yes. But otherwise, I'm still performing here in South Australia. This is where I live. I've got a family. I've got two kids, two children. I've got two daughters. My one daughter just came and handed me a chocolate, so I'm very happy about that. And I've got a wife called Tara, and we love living here in South Australia. Life is very simple. It's very good. We're very blessed. But who knows? Maybe in the future I might get into cricket commentary or something. But I've got to be invited first. No one invites me. But um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, it has been a great conversation with you. And I've really enjoyed, not just enjoyed, I've also learned a lot because your journey is, of course, one that tells us how you've overcome a lot of odds. You had your moments in the sun on the cricket field, and now you're in another field, but you are still making a mark. And I think that's what is the true character of Henry Olonga, is that he wants to go and make a mark. So we wish you the very best for everything that lies ahead. And with your music career, if there is a comeback in store, even for your cricket, then as a commentator,
No.
we'll be very
There's
happy.
no. I don't know about a comeback as a cricket player. Maybe as a
A
commentator,
commentator, yeah.
but what I am doing now is I'm now involved in athletics again. You see, I used to do athletics as a schoolboy. I was a very promising athlete. Actually, before cricket, it was all athletics, athletics, athletics. Um, and I cover this in my audiobook, but I was a very promising athlete. I ran the 100 meters in 10.6 seconds. I threw the javelin 60 meters, and I ran the 200 meters in 21.6 seconds. So I was a fast runner, and I kind of missed it. And a couple of seasons ago, I decided I want to get back into athletics. So I'm involved in masters athletics now. So I don't play any cricket, but I'm involved in athletics. So in the summer season, which is starting soon for us, maybe in about September, October, I'm going to be getting back into athletics, throwing the javelin mainly. And you never know, I might throw the javelin well enough to do well in the Masters athletics competition, or maybe even higher honors. You never know. Maybe my 47-year-old arm can still throw it quite a long way. We'll see.
That's really amazing. And we wish you the very best for Masters Athletics, for your singing, for everything that lies ahead. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been my pleasure too. Thanks for your time.